Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful, auspicious Bookshop Day event. My name is Will Smith, and I work for Sam Reed's Bookshop in Grasmere, a bookshop that has been in Grasmere since 1887. So we feel a very special connection with the celebration of bricks and mortar bookshops. Thank you for tuning in this evening. If this is your first event, or this is maybe second or third Sam Reed's event that you've come to, we're delighted you can join us. This evening, I have the joy and the pleasure of getting to talk to Nadia Wassef about her wonderful book, Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller. Now, I have been probably low-key raving about this to people since it came out in hardback. I'm delighted it's now out in paperback, so it's even more affordable and portable for people to get their hands on. And it seemed like the perfect thing to do to celebrate Bookshop Day by talking about bookselling and a very particular memoir of bookselling. I should just let you know that this evening's event is going to be roughly an hour. I will be in conversation with Nadia, and then we will also be offering up the opportunity to you, the audience, to ask questions as well, which we will get to later. So if at any point during the event something crops up, a question or comment, do pop it in the chat and we will turn to that later in the event. So we're always happy to have audience feedback as we go, and that's one of the joys of being able to do these events too. So Nadia Wassef co-founded Diwan, a small corner bookstore in Cairo. Over the last 20 years, it's grown into Egypt's fiercely independent leading chain of bookstores with 10 branches and a publishing house. Before Diwan, Nadia worked in research and advocacy for the Female Genital Mutilation Task Force and the Women in Memory Forum. Her work as a bookseller, entrepreneur, and women's rights activist has been covered in the Washington Post, Time, Monocle, and Business Monthly, among many other publications. Nadia was the recipient of the 2022 Woman of the Year Award, UNICEF, and Look magazine under the category of Woman for Women. She holds 3 MA degrees, one in English and Comparative Literature from the American University in Cairo, the second in Social Anthropology from SOAS in London, and the third in Creative Writing from Birkbeck at University of London. Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller, her memoir, is currently being translated into 11 languages. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Nadia.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And I'm a very big fan of Sam Reed and Will.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a joy to get to chat to you about this book. And also, I should flag up to start with there that this is being translated into 11 languages. And I love the way in which the title is subtly shifting in each of them. We had to look up the German translation because the German edition has a really exciting title, like Fate Turns a Page Every Day.
My Adventures as a Bookseller in Cairo is the subtitle. Yeah. And I remember having a conversation of, well, are you sure you want such a wordy title? I mean, just how about Cairo Bookseller or that, and they're like, no, we like this. And I said, right. And then they said, and we're going to put your picture on the cover. And I said, are you sure? They said, we know our market. This is how this works. And I thought, oh, all right, fine. Everybody seems to have, it's what I found really interesting is how different covers, every sort of language had a certain aesthetic or relationship to, I mean, my UK publishers were like, we need a minaret. And I thought, well, okay, why? I mean, you can have an obelisk. You can, we can do all sorts of things. We can have the Cairo Tower. They're like, no, we need a minaret. And it's so funny because people respond to it. They like the minaret.
Yes, that kind of shadowing of a sense of place or tapping into people's understanding of a place before they come to it. It's really interesting, that visual language.
Yeah.
But first of all, I should begin by asking, so this is a memoir of your history with Diwan. Where did the idea come from that you would write about this time period?
So by the end of the book, you realize that I have a very fraught and troubled relationship with my firstborn, Diwan, the bookstore. And when I left Egypt and I went back to university, because every time I'm at a certain stage of my life and I don't know what to do, I go back to school and I get a master's. So there have been 3 times in my life where I didn't know what to do, so I went back to school and got a master's. Um, so when I went back and I thought, well, I've been selling books for so long, and I really would like to write, but I lack the confidence to do so, and I need someone to tell me that I can do it. In a sense, I need to give myself permission. And I went back to school, and I was writing, and my advisor at the time, Julia Bell, and I did creative nonfiction, and she told me, this is the story you need to write. And I said, it's not the story I want to write. And she said, well, it doesn't matter, it's the one you need to. And so it began as 3 short stories. And then I couldn't find how to string them together. They were just 3 short stories. And then this idea of having every chapter mirror a section of the bookstore. And it was a lovely sort of skeleton to hang everything on, and it became the pivot for exclusion or inclusion. Does the story fit? Will it fit under any of these themes? Oh, it doesn't? Okay, you're out. And it made life so much easier for me. The part that I really didn't want was to be present in the book. I wanted to write Diwen's story because, as you can tell in my relationship with the book, I think that Diwen is a person, and she has a mind of her own, and she rebels against me a lot. And when I started writing, my editor was reading and commenting back to me, and she said, well, I understand the anthropomorphic thing that we've got going on here, and fine, but we need someone we can relate to, and you're it. And I said, but I don't, and so slowly I started seeping in through the pages much more than I ever wanted to. And then it became, when we were choosing titles, it became Chronicles of a Cairo Books. And I said, well, why can't it be, Diary of a Bookshop, or Story of a, anything else? But as you will know, Will, books write themselves to a very large extent. I mean, we start out with a plan, and then the book unfolds in a very different direction. And then by the time it's in the reader's hands, well, that's the other 50% of the book that you didn't write, but that gets written. And for a control freak, this is hell. I have no control over who reads what into this.
That's wonderful. And we know that, there's clearly a large amount of shelf space taken up by books about bookshops and books about bookselling. And that doesn't seem to be abating anytime soon. It just seems to be expanding and expanding. So there's clearly a lot of readership for books about bookshops. They're held very dear to people.
They are, because I also think, what we don't realize, and sometimes I've said this a lot, and I'm going to keep on saying it until everyone, tells me to stop it. And even if they do, I think I'll still keep on going. The thing is that in the world that we live in today, there aren't that many spaces that are accepting or inclusive, and all you have to do is just show up. And the lovely thing is that your only affinity is that you've shown up. I mean, that's the only thing you have in common. So you don't have to be the same age or gender or race or socioeconomic status. And how many places in this world are left for us where it's a commercial space and we don't actually have to practice commerce? We can just be. And I mean, when I look around me, these places are all eroding. I mean, the war on libraries, the economic war of attrition on libraries, is, I mean, in the UK, in the last 12 years, 800 libraries have closed. That's 17% of all libraries. That's harrowing. And that is not a good thing at all. Because, I mean, also, I read this article once where the author was saying that libraries also double up as, care services. It's where the elderly go in the morning. It's where children go after school for, it's where daycare ends up happening. It's where you feel your loneliness. It's everything. It's a community, and we can't afford to lose that. And it's the same thing with bookshops. And I'm very, very proud of the fact that the naysayers and all the the voices of doom and the industry experts 15 years ago told us books it's finished. You're all finished. Booksellers are, it's you're now extinct, and you will be in 10 years. And what, in the last 3, 4 years in the UK, it's had the largest resurgence of independent bookstores.
Yeah, no, that's such a positive story, isn't it? That this is something that is not only surviving but seemingly thriving again. That there's a will on both sides to visit and to staff and to be in shops. You know, being a bookseller is still a desirable thing in all kinds of ways.
There is a huge commitment. And by the way, I mean, the job of a bookseller, and you and I both know this, we're mini, so I mean, our skill set, or the one that we build along the way as we firefight through the day, you know, you are an accountant, you are a manager, you are doing very high level housekeeping, you're also doing maintenance, you're also doing therapy, and you're dealing with people sometimes that are not easy. And and you love books, and you're ordering books. I mean, you're a CEO, you're a therapist, you're a housekeeper, you're all of this, and you get paid less than all of these people. I mean, this is a vocation. It is a calling, and it's one that I will never stop, you know, tooting the horn of and saying how brilliant it is.
That's terrific. I think that's fantastic because it reminds me that when I meet other booksellers, I kind of wonder why it is we all get on so well. And I realize that, it attracts very, certain kinds of people who want to do those multiple tasks, certainly. So it comes across strongly. I feel we should get a passage from the book though to start with, so we get a sense of the book itself. So maybe you could introduce us to the bookshop.
Okay, so the passage that I would like to share with you is from the cafe section, and this is how the book opens. To the uninitiated pedestrian, Diwan was just one of several shops behind the Bella Mansion's ornate exterior. The traditional royal blue street sign read Shara 26 Yulyo, 26th of July Street. We'd placed our logo in formidable black text on the building's facade. A supplicant jacaranda bowed over the shop entrance. The glass front door, which faced the street corner, was adorned with modern Arabo-Islamic designs and a long silver handle. Inside was an oasis from the hot, traffic-choked street. Strains of Arabo jazz, Kulthum, and George Gershwin were underscored by the mechanical din of air-conditioning units. Beneath a mighty wall with signs for recommendations, bestsellers, and new releases, Arabic and English fiction and non-fiction books cascaded from floating shelves. Visitors could either walk through the doorway on the right to the book section, past the cashier and stationery, or enter the left doorway into the multimedia section, a curated collection of boundary-crossing film and music, experimental and classic, Eastern and Western. During the research phase of setting up Diwan, I'd read an article stating that most people turn right upon entering a bookstore. Swayed by this observation, we placed the book section of Diwan to the right. There the windows looked out onto the adjoining courtyard, rather than the main road, making it the quieter part of the store. High ceilings lined with tracks of incandescent lighting illuminated mahogany wood shelves with a matte steel trim, a marriage of old and new. The books were split into two categories. On the left were our Arabic books, which Hind stocked. On the right were the English books, my domain. We placed our modest selection of French and German titles in the multimedia section. A nearby entryway led to the cafe, the central hearth of the store.
That's
And I
lovely.
miss it. I miss it.
and you talk early on in the book about how in 2002 this was a significant thing to be created in Cairo, and you have what's also interesting is though you still have the kind of slight commonality of experience in that I'm probably sure every bookseller has at some point been asked, sorry, are these for sale? Are you selling these, or is this a library? And you talk about having to kind of coax your new customers into understanding this space, but how truly significant was that in Cairo at the point?
Well, I think it was very significant in the sense that, I mean, in 2002, cafe culture which is now, I mean, people in their 20s and 30s don't think that cafe, I mean, they have this feeling that it was always there. But I mean, cafe culture wasn't always there. I mean, the rise of Starbucks and Pret a Manger and these chains and this third place that was with the comfy chairs, and I mean the sitcom Friends that brought in, I mean the Central Perk, that was the glue that kept them together, the meeting place. It was their third place. Everybody wanted a third place. And at the time, that really wasn't everywhere in the world. It had begun in the 90s, I think. And but in Egypt, it hadn't sort of hit. It started by 2005. There was a massive, the modern cafe culture. But I mean, historically, since the 17th century, probably we had the ahwa culture. So it's a cafe, but it's the cafe where the men go. They play backgammon. They smoke shisha. Um, it's that kind of thing, but it wasn't the all-inclusive space, whereas bookstores, they are the all-inclusive space, and cafes, mothers, fathers, children, young men, women, it has a larger demographic that it caters to. So no, I think it was a big deal. And I also think the other part that was interesting was that we had put in a lot of emphasis on the aesthetic of the space. And we had, the design element was very important to us. And so people would walk in and, almost be suspicious of the fact that, things were very clearly labeled. The lighting was lovely. Oh, look, we have murals here. And the cafe was just very spick and span, and everything was in sort of very good order. And people were like, well, you must be more expensive then. Well, no, I mean, I'm selling the same book that guy is selling in the street, but you can just buy it here. No, that why then, and then so you'd go from suspicion to, so why isn't all this for free then why can't I just borrow the book? And it's interesting that you'd have one extreme reaction and then the other extreme at the same time, and you'd be like, right, well, I clearly can't win, so I'm not going to try.
Yes, there is that kind of desire to be all inclusive, and then also that does mean you get attacked from all angles in that sense too.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other lovely thing, and you've talked about it in the opening here, is that in coming to the structure you did, which guides you around the shop, that kind of gives you a tour of the shop, you get to dig into what every shop has a form of, but what certainly was so unique to yours. So like for example, the Egypt Essentials chapter, which is near the opening of the book, where you have this section in the shop. It serves as such a great kind of talking point, but also a great way of thinking about what your customers might need, and their kind of formation of identity being in such flux. Was that one of the first stories you kind of got down on paper?
Actually, no, but it was the one. But it was the one that I felt was the most necessary. A friend recently had read the book, and she asked me, and she said, if I had to read one chapter in this book, what would that chapter be? And I told her it's not my favorite chapter because the heavy lifting is in it, but it's the one, if you really want to understand Egypt and Diwan and what book, the power of the written word and the power of books and colonialism and history, it's chapter 2. It's Egypt Essentials. And I think this is the beating heart of successful bookstores. It is that unique thing that they have. I mean, I remember walking into the first Daunts I ever walked into and looking at the fiction section and realizing that it was by nationality of the author. And I was floored. I mean, I don't think it's a great categorization device, but I think it's an interesting trope. And I think it's something that makes me question certain things. And I mean, what else do I want? I mean, I do want to question my own assumptions. That is lovely. So I love that. And I think for us, Egypt Essentials was also a way of grappling with the identities of, of being who we are, being, looking at our country and trying to understand it from different vantage points. And it really was this, that section enabled us to position Egypt as a cubist painting that you could see from all these different angles. And in many ways, it was sort of a rallying cry for, fragments of a history of fragments. And I love it, and I love the fact that I had Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile next to Edward Lane's Manners and Customs of the Modern Egyptians, next to a book on a coffee table book on Coptic Christianity, and I love that. These are the things, and that's one of the things that I try and resist doing when I do go shopping at Diwan is, I think these displays talk to each other. And I love that, when you stack books, it's a conversation because book selling is a conversation. And so, I like that it's almost, there's an element here of architecture where you decide that you're going to put this stack of books next to this one because they're commenting on each other, or maybe it's antagonistic, or one point of view and the opposing one. And I that's one of the things I really enjoyed doing as a bookseller. I loved stacking, and also when you're a bit manic about shelves and the order of things, and it fulfills something in you.
And there's that, I suppose
And
there's
I'm
that.
looking at the books behind you. I'm yearning to come in and just take everything down, alphabetize, categorize. You can pick the categories if you like. I mean,
we I love that. I love that impulse, and that idea that there are ways in which you're trying to orient yourself, but also that how section headings and kind of sections that you've set up are themselves thought-provoking. The category itself prompts thought, but then actually what goes into it prompts thought, and what sits next to each other, and even the kind of chanceness of alphabetizing amongst a section, what it throws up, the strange dissonance. I mean, actually my favorites are things like in kinds of nature writing where you find two authors next to each other who would never really like to be next to each other, and you also then see that the same person has blurbed both books favorably, and you think, how did that happen? Those sorts of kind of chance happenings on shelves, I think, are themselves interesting. But then in your book, you have that kind of evaluation, I guess, of the people, the kind of customers that have been then kind of refracted or reflected back through the section. So, for example, in I think it's in business, there's a customer who recurs quite a lot. Is it? I have his name here.
well, there's Dr. Midhat, who's always upset that we're not catering enough to the ancient Egypt contingent. And that, and this is very interesting because his relationship with the past and why he reads, I mean, he reads looking for glory and comfort. And he is very uncomfortable with the world that he's living in at the moment. And in harking back to the what he perceives as this glorious past, the pyramids and the sphinxes and these big statement architecture moments for him, this for him is where he finds solace. And to have this constant conversation, and he'd be going around, I mean, it's almost like he was the shelf inspector. He was a retired older gentleman, and he would walk in, and I mean, I don't necessarily like books that sort of bitch about the customers. I mean, they are our bread and butter, and like every line of work, I mean, there's some people that are a joy to deal with, and some that just aren't, and it's all right. But I have to say that there were moments where he'd walk in, and I'd be like, no, not today, please, not today, please. And then there were other times where it was a joy to argue with him and to just say, well, actually, no, I don't think this is a good idea. And no, I mean, I see your point, but maybe we could see it this way. So, and at the end of the day, all these characters educated us a great deal. And a lot of what went on our shelves and in our displays was driven by our customers. And that was a thing that I think Diwan was very good at, and at the time quite special. I mean, today, everybody talks about, in any retail business, you talk about the customer driven experience and customer satisfaction. Yeah, no, in 2000, it wasn't that big a thing. I mean, this whole the customer at the center of everything, the customer driving everything, the data, the statistics, that wasn't there. I mean, you might have had some random survey thrown at you at some, and definitely in Egypt it wasn't there. And I think the fact that we did that again very consciously
Mm.
was a big point for us, a big driving force that shaped the business.
And you have that really interesting dynamic, because it is an ongoing conversation with many of those customers that we see here, where yes, you're learning from them, but then, as you say, you're also in conversation, and by virtue of the shelves, kind of challenging them back to say there are other points of view, other perspectives here, which might be uncomfortable. And I wonder how that dynamic sits, because it's a really interesting one in terms of how much you both cater to what's expected and how much you then cater to potential discovery, potential kind of unsettling books and challenging books.
Oh, I think that's one of the driving forces, and that's how I've sort of lived in many ways. In interactions, you have to give people something that is familiar to them, that they can hold on to, and then you can surprise them. And they can be more accepting and open to being surprised. And that's something that we constantly did at Diwan, that we were constantly, yes, here is the run of the mill stuff, but here's something. And I think that was why a lot of people came back, because they always knew that there would be something new and different. And we also, I mean, we trained our booksellers very well, and they were very, and it's very funny. So Ahmed, who's one of my favorites, and he's in the book. The last time I was in Cairo, he came up to me and he said, it's selling very well. I'm like, really? That's great. He's like, people are buying it largely because of me. And I said, seriously? He's like, yes. I mean, I am everybody's favorite bookseller. And I take center stage in the book. I'm like, Ahmed, you reappear about 4 times, and we can count the lines. I mean, I don't want to deflate your ego, but you have to be kidding. And he's like, no, I'm the center of this, and I love it, and I love selling it. So thank you. And I was like, oh, that's fine. And then and then Ashraf comes up to me, another one of our books, and these guys have been there for 20 years. And he said, I'm very upset that I wasn't in the book. And I said, look, I understand. I love you. This is great. Thank you for sharing. But, you know, there are a lot of us. I had to pick. I was like, but I did think of, I mean, Ahmed also included your personality as well. If, and that didn't wash. I tried, but that didn't go over at all.
But there are interesting things in such, like the one of the subjects you tackle is self-help books, and the role that self-help books might have within Egyptian society, the kind of translation of American trends in self-help and how they may or may not kind of sit with Egyptian consumers and readers. And I think it's interesting that you managed to kind of process that by way of thinking about the longer history of self-help in different forms, and seem to kind of come to understand, or at least welcome it in a sense, once you realize that it has this longer history that you're much more comfortable with in terms of Victorian and pre-Victorian kind of era texts. And I wonder, do you think you had that experience in lots of different areas? The book itself obviously covers a strict number of topics, but did you
Yeah.
find that kind of discovery was discrete, or did you go through that with many different areas of society and the bookshop?
Well, look, I mean, one of the things that, and this applies globally, it doesn't just apply in the politics of translation, in a sense. I often wonder, I mean, the big gurus of entrepreneurship and business books, and, I mean, business and management books have had a great ride in the last 30, 40 years. Well, these guys generally have a UK, US background. This is their landscape, their territory. This is what informs how and what they write. And yet these books are sold in the hundreds of thousands all over the world. And I'm not just talking about the Middle East. I'm talking about the Far East, Asia. I mean, all over. And yet the cultural context is completely different. And yet they keep on selling. And what I find fascinating, I mean, is how they haven't done actually spin-offs for these cultural contexts. I mean, you and I were talking earlier about sitting in a bookshop and wondering, why isn't there a book about, and my question is, surprised that, I mean, these business guys have missed out on an easy buck here. I mean, because you can spin this, good to great in India, good to great, I mean, you can spin this. And so, but on a very conscious political level, when we talk about diversity in publishing, it's also a diversity of context. And so, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I was constantly reading these business books because I know nothing about business and I hate numbers and all of that. But I was constantly reading these business books and I never found myself in their pages.
Mhm.
And it's interesting, culturally, it's not because I'm a woman and I'm looking for women. Other than that, I mean, that's an obvious one. But culturally, it's a completely different context. Our relationship to bureaucracy is different. Everything is different. How do you solve that? And how do these books sell so well? What are they offering then? If they're not offering remedial solutions, what are they offering? So that's one thing. The other thing is that I've made my peace with self-help. I hate self-help books, but I have made my peace with them. And I'll tell you why I hate them. It's the bastardization of something that I think was once lovely. So it is, I mean, I think Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus is a very valid book. I think 23 spin offs of it is ridiculous. And so, and this sort of the pharmacy of the soul is something that, I mean, I'm skeptical. And I think we all need to be. Self-help books do work. Do you know why they work? Because when you read it, you're super conscious and you start implementing, and then you slip. That's how it works. It works because you decide that you're going to make it work, and then you forget, and then it just doesn't work anymore. But the reason that I've found a reconciliation with them is because the history. I started researching the history of self-help and found that the first self-help manual that we and this isn't me being an ancient Egyptophile, but was in the I think 4th century BC. In good old nepotistic fashion, a vizier was resigning and passing the job on to his son, and the pharaoh asked him to relay everything that he knows to his son, and so he wrote a letter. And this is the first recorded thing we have of a father's advice to his son who's about to take over his job on how to live the good life. And then you see this through the ancient Greeks, eudaimonia, the good life, as Aristotle was looking for it. Ars Romancia, I think, was Ovid. Basically, how to land the girl, how to not ditch the girl. I mean, this is that famous book, or it's basically Why Men Love Bitches is the ancient Greek version of it. And I found these threads, and it sort of assuaged my wrath a little bit, because I saw the progression of how we got here. But if you look at it as really this philosophical guide to better living through sharing someone else's experience, through higher ideals, I find it more palatable that way.
That's wonderful, and I love the way that the section prompted you to do that. That there was this kind of reflection to go away and say, right, I need to come to peace with this and this role within what I suppose you end up feeling a huge responsibility towards your customers in that sense, to feel like you are passionately advocating for the books that you're selling. So there's a huge amount in the book about your kind of understanding of the potential consumers and the consumers themselves, which seems to also play out in the broader role the shop has, I suppose, in Egyptian society. So what it's doing in each location seems to be a very different thing. I wonder whether you could talk a bit about how, as the shop expanded, it kind of, how it kept true to its original ideals and maybe where it went afterwards.
Well, this was again as a sort of rehabilitated control freak. It used to always surprise me how much you engineer a space and you put the shelves and you do this and you decide, I'm going to put these categories here. I'm going to have the cafe here for there's everything has a reason, right? And you're not just also constrained by building codes that no, this wall can't move here and this, yes, you are, but then there's a narrative in your head as to how you're going to engineer a specific space to create a certain dynamic. And then the space takes on a life of its own. And in spite of your best intentions and your will, everything unfolds completely differently. And I mean, we had, case in point, the first store, Zamalek. So we had this very romantic notion of people picking, a stack of books and then taking them lovingly to the cafe and sitting and sipping on a cappuccino or a Turkish coffee or a mint tea and, browsing and really reflecting on what they would like to buy and taking their time. The reality was that, when you have, the Arabic teacher or the teaching English as a foreign language teacher who comes in and uses your cafe as her, unpaid headquarters and orders one bottle of water and does 8 classes there back to back. And you're sort of sitting there thinking, well, this isn't what I planned at all. Or you have the lovely lady who is a prostitute who comes in at night and is, this becomes her new stomping ground, and you have to have the conversation, the very awkward and embarrassing conversation, to say, I'm so sorry, I know this is an accepting space and I don't mean to insult you, but you have to leave. And then you have people doing tarot card readings, and you have people, and it's almost everything is happening except browsing the book and sipping the everything else is happening. And then with other stores, it was different. The Heliopolis one, which was 3 stories, it was very. It felt like a family home. It really did, and it was in a very sort of um, kind of family neighborhood with lots of gardens, lots of trees, and it sort of took on the feeling of its surrounding areas. And then, the Cairo University store, which is the first store we had to close down. And it broke my heart that my top 10 selling items were cafe items. They weren't books, they were stationery and cafe. And and it forced conversations about the affordability and the essentiality of books. And what do you do? I mean, even if you know that the numbers don't add up and this is slightly hopeless, do you abandon it or do you pursue it regardless? And these are important decisions, but you have to know what you've decided and why you've decided it. And then circling back to the first store, Diwan during the revolution years, I it was a very difficult time to run a business because it's chaos and you're worried about the, emotions are running very high and it is chaos. I mean, you're in the shop, there are tanks, army tanks up and down the street, there are protests, there are million-man marches, and you don't know whether you're opening or you're not opening. Can your employees make it to work? Is it safe for them to go home? The opening and closing of the shops, you have to run different protocols for the safety of people, and there were 2 years that just were incredibly difficult. And I remember one day standing in the Zamalek store and looking around me and realizing that people were here either to escape the chaos of the world that they could not process and the uncertainty of all that lay ahead, or to face it together in numbers and to find other people, not necessarily their family, not necessarily their closest friends, but random strangers to help them process what was happening. And that we had a role in that. we provided that space, that forum, very accidentally. I mean, we did. I don't think we set out to, um, but that was there and that it was important. It fulfilled the function.
Mhm. Actually, I will invite some questions from the audience too, but I wonder whether, thinking about that, we could maybe hear you have maybe a reading about how you decided on the name of the bookshop, and I just wondered whether we could hear a bit of that to understand the philosophy of yeah, how it came about.
Thank you. This is one of my favorites. From the beginning, we knew that our bookstore couldn't be a relic of the past. It had to have a purpose and a vision. Every aspect had to be intentional, beginning with the name. One afternoon, our mother, Faiza, listened politely as Hind and I grappled with this dilemma. Underwhelmed by our suggestions and eager to return to her lunch, she proposed Diwan. She enumerated its translations, a collection of poetry in Persian and Arabic, a meeting place, a guest house, a sofa, a title for a high-ranking official. Diwani was a type of Arabic calligraphy. She paused, then added that the word worked phonetically in Arabic, English, and French. She returned to the plate in front of her. We were dismissed. Empowered by our name, we approached Nirmin Hammam, a graphic designer, also known as Minou, to help us build our brand. Her humor was swift and biting, her gummy smile all-knowing. Minou asked Hind, Nihal, and me to describe Diwan as if she were a person. We told her that she was a person, and this is her story. Diwan was conceived as a reaction to a world that had stopped caring about the written word. She was born on March 8, 2002, coincidentally International Women's Day. She is larger than the space she occupies. She welcomes and respects others in all their differences. Like a good host, she invites patrons to stay a while longer in her cafe. In principle, she is anti-smoking. She knows that most places in her homeland aren't, but she is resolved to stand for better. She has nobler ideals than her surroundings permit. She is honest, but she will not punish thieves. She is sincere and insists on weeding out those who aren't. She doesn't like numbers. She doesn't like the binary world that surrounds her, and she is set on changing it, one book at a time. She believes that North and South, East and West are restrictive terms. So she offers books in Arabic, English, French, and German. She brings people and ideas together.
That's wonderful. We actually I guess we have a question that maybe jumps off into some of that here from an audience member. So there's the suggestion in the book that Egyptian readers only encounter new Arabic literature previously at Cairo Book Fair and perhaps amongst kind of elite cultures. And the question is wondering whether Diwan has a role to play in bridging that Arabic literature and literature in English divide that was originally organized between the two sides of the store. And they're particularly thinking about the rapidly growing 21st century body of Arab fiction in English or translated into English and how it would sell in the shop.
Well, look, I think Diwan played a part, but I think there was a much larger ecosystem that was coming into place. So in 2002, we hadn't had an Egyptian bestseller in a very long time. And I mean, I talk about this in the beginning of the book when I'm setting the scene, and that sort of it had been sort of the death of the author and the bureaucratization of the author, that the author became a cultural bureaucrat, and that we had lost, the national endowments that could support authors or writers or publishers and programs and stuff like that. And in 2002, the Yaqubian building by Ala El Aswani was published, and he published it in the beginning, I think, with Matbuli. And this was really interesting because this was a book that Diwan was selling and that the newspaper kiosk on the pavement outside was selling, same price, and it was selling all over the place. And also, he was a dentist. Ala El Aswani is still a professional dentist. The writing gig was a side gig. It wasn't his thing. And so he broke a lot of barriers. Here was the non-professional author. Here was the bestseller is back. Everybody's talking about this book, and they all feel like, because it's, you know, it's the residents of a building, it's a cross section of a country. This is a trope used by many authors before, and he does it beautifully, and everybody's guessing. So is this guy, is this corrupt, you know, cultural literati, is this guy so and so, is this belly dancer so and so, you know, and and it has a buzz around it. So more people actually started writing. You know, I didn't need to be a professional writer to write. He burst that bubble beautifully for people. Um, there was also, you know, with Diwan opening, oh, okay, so bookshops are a viable thing. Oh, let's open bookshops then. So people started opening more bookshops. And then young publishers began. You know, so the ecosystem was all happening at the same time. I'm very, very happy that Diwan played a part in it, but it's a part. You know, I mean, everybody jumped in at it. And this was also the time where the Cairo Alexandria Stock Exchange was booming. There was money that was happening, and people were looking to invest. And a lot of people who had perhaps left Egypt in the 80s and 90s and gone and studied abroad and worked abroad came back. And so it's this very happy coincidence of a lot of different economic and social and political factors.
Mm. And so I suppose then, given that that is a kind of collective thing, that it's a societal thing, it's maybe a kind of an arts community thing that's developing there. How did you then start to gauge what your own definition of success was going to be? It seems to shift quite a lot during the book as well, in terms of your reflections on different periods. Did you have a set sense of, you know, what would be a successful thing to say, yes, we've achieved something, the shop does this, does that, it's reached this goal?
So when we first opened, success for me was not closing, was just staying open. Because I didn't think that, you know, I mean, I didn't think full stop. None of us did. I mean, had we known what the next 20 years of our lives would look like, we probably would never have done this. But there is a tremendous amount of wisdom to not really thinking and just, you know, looking before you, I mean, not looking and just leaping and then thinking, oh, no, what have I done? And I can't undo it, so I just have to keep going. Um, so the success in the beginning was just sustainability. And then you get greedy, or at least I did. And I wanted more shops because for me it was a conquest of space and it was spreading a message. And you know, and I felt that it was a noble message, to be honest. Um, and one worth spreading. You know, I'm not a supermarket, I'm not a shoe store. I mean, I'm not knocking shoes. I love shoes and I love food, but I mean, you know, this is a bookstore. We have higher ideals here. You know, that's at least how I felt. Um, and then when it all started tanking, I really did feel like a failure. And I felt like a failure up until very recently, I have to say. And I think, you know, my sister made fun of me the other day. She told me, you know, writing shouldn't be therapy for you. It actually has to have a value for others. And I'm going to confess that this was therapy for me. I'm glad that it had value for others, but it was a very selfish endeavor at the onset, that I was looking for closure, that I was looking for, I wanted Diwan to forgive me and I wanted to forgive Diwan. And because we had many, many years where we catapulted into the red and we stayed there and we were just bleeding cash. And no matter what we did, we, we couldn't make ends meet. We just couldn't. We tried and we kept, you know, and this is covered in the book that, you know, Hens was saying we have to open more stores, we have to amortize the overheads, this is a very, very labor intensive business. Nihal was saying no, we have to close, and I was like, okay, whoever talks to me is the winner, you know, last person speaks to me, I will just go with their point of view, because I was lost at that point and I was drained. 20 years on, my definition of success is entirely internal. Success is whatever your success is, it is the one that no one else can witness, and it is the one that you do not speak of. That is your success. So there you go.
That's great.
But for Diwan, my regret is that I prioritized income over impact at one point because, hey, I became the entrepreneur. And so, it was all about the money at a certain point. And that's exactly when Diwan started rebelling against me because she felt that I had, betrayed the ideals we began with because I was just worried about the bottom line. But in all fairness, we had 150 staff members. We were responsible for a lot of people. And I didn't want to fire people. And I did feel a tremendous amount of responsibility for everything. And so I did become obsessed with the bottom line. But no, I now see the value of the impact and the integrity that Diwan spread over the income, for sure.
Mm, that's really interesting. It reminds me of there's a book studying booksellers called Reluctant Capitalists. The idea that they are kind of, they are and aren't. There's always this kind of want to talk about their existence as businesses, and as you say, they have the obligations, but then they also have the ideals that mean that's not necessarily where the focus ought to be, should be, often is, because it's back into yeah, the kind of life that it's creating, that space, that impact that you mentioned in the book about all of those shops doing something much more than being retail space.
But
They
it's
are
still
that.
difficult. It is difficult. These are forces that, every business that has a noble message of some sort, you grapple with it. At some point, when you have to come down on a side, what side do you pick?
We have a couple more questions for you. This is a good one. What is your favorite book or books about bookshops and bookselling, other than, I should say, obviously Chronicles of a Cairo Bookseller is still a key book to plug, but
Um,
outside of that?
I love Martin Latham's A Bookseller's Tale. And I really like chatting with Martin Latham, and I love how eclectic and the breadth of knowledge and time and space that is covered in that book. Um, so that would have to be one of my number one favorites. A Bookshop in Algiers, I also really like. Um, I liked the bookseller of Kabul, I have to say, but I feel like it hasn't aged well.
Mm.
It's funny how, and I wonder, because books do age in a very interesting way, and some of them, in today's world, I mean, there are some books that just have gotten cancelled. There are others that I mean, it's funny. I was in Strand Bookstore last week in New York, and it was Banned Books Week recently in the US, and so they had a bunch of books, and I posted this on Instagram because I was fascinated. Oh God, one of the Dr. Seuss books is cancelled. It's banned in Colorado for being sexist.
Mm.
You know, James Joyce, Ulysses, was burnt for. I mean, I didn't know this. I mean, and I have this fondness for James Joyce because he wrote. I mean, once I got over and got to the capacity to read and understand. But he says somewhere that he constantly writes about Dublin because if he feels that he can understand the heart of Dublin, he can understand the heart of any city. And
Mm.
I feel that way about Cairo. I feel that if I can understand it, and the fact that I see Diwan and Cairo as protagonists in their own right. They are characters. It's not gone are the days of the Alexandria Quartet where the city of Alexandria is a backdrop upon which these fabulous characters do all these wonderful things, but it's this very stale and immobile backdrop. Whereas, today I think, and I see this as a very sort of colonialist reading of the city. Whereas today, I look at Cairo as a protagonist that inflicts, on characters. It shapes them. It is the driver of action. It plot unfolds because of it. It's a very different rendition of the city and understanding of the hero. I have to shut up. I know. I'm sorry.
I suppose kind of leading on from that too, do you think that you are your next writing, is it going to return to Cairo? Are you going to be, you know, still thinking to understand that through writing, or do you have other plans writing wise?
So I'm working on two things. One is something that terrifies me the most. It's fiction. So I find it quite terrifying. And and so I pick it up and I break up with it and then I go back to it very sheepishly and then I sort of dump it again, and so there is this very horrible relationship. It's a toxic relationship, as my daughter tells me. um, and the other one is actually I've started working on something where I'm meeting booksellers. I'm picking up. I'm who snowballing really. So talking to booksellers about the books that changed their lives. But I'm sort of writing it as creative nonfiction. They're short stories. They're based entirely on true life and all, but and I'm really enjoying that, and I find it very healing somehow because I mean, upholstered deeply inside all the very obvious differences, there's a shocking amount of similarity, and I like that. I like I in a very divisive world, I take comfort in things that bring us together.
That's wonderful. And that sounds fascinating, because I know that that's one of the things that, again, we always benefit when booksellers are together, hearing what they're most passionate about, because you'll know that there are booksellers who will love one book and they will just go on and they will persuade you and they will kind of illustrate exactly what it means to them. And yeah, it's an incredibly persuasive kind of thing to have demonstrated to you. And I'd love to see where that goes. That sounds brilliant. Um, and I suppose we also have one final thing that we do ask outside of books on bookshops. Are there any other books that we should be reading right now, in your opinion? Are there things that we should be turning our eyes towards that maybe aren't getting the same kind of acclaim or the same kind of commercial buzz that the big books are?
Well, I mean, I will always. So there is one book that I've recently fallen in love with, and it's written in English by an Egyptian writer called Noor Naga, and it's called When an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. If an Egyptian cannot speak English, and I love it. I love it, and I think it's Grey Wolf Press who published it,
Okay.
and I was blown away. It's incredibly gutsy. The structure, the narrative. It's very creative and very brave. And I'm always going to sort of. I mean, I I pick up and I know Piranesi. I've just read Piranesi and I fell in love. I mean, again, it's something like I've never read a book like that before. It wasn't a book. It was architecture. It was lovely. It was just architecture. It was sensational, and that has gotten a lot of acclaim. I know. And a very dear favorite of mine, The Art of Hearing Heartbeats. Did that one land very well in the UK? I
It's not one I know. The Art of Hearing Heartbeats. I will
oh,
look it up.
oh, I love.
That's
If,
wonderful.
if
But
an
great,
Egyptian cannot speak English,
great, and also great to hear that the love of Piranesi transcending as well, because there's something just, I think there's something again incredibly similar to working in a kind of a mazy bookshop to the world of Piranesi, where you're kind of wondering about what the albatrosses are doing in the third hall.
yes. No, and writing yourself into being and writing yourself out of being. And I was just reading it and thinking, oh, stop it, stop it.
Powerful stuff indeed. Well, thank you so much for sparing the time to speak to us on this bookshop day
Are you
evening.
kidding? You made my night. You made my day. And happy bookshop day to you and to everyone who's been with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for coming out, and also to Neve from Corsair for arranging this as well. We're so well supported by publishers, and we're so delighted that we can do these kinds of events. So thanks once again, Nadia. And yes, goodbye, and huge thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you. This was lovely. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye.